Am I already live? Oh my Lord. Don't you hate it when that happens? I hate it when that happens. Okay. I guess we're live. Yeah, we are. That's okay. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the morning broadcast. Do you like this? Do you like the morning broadcast? I love the morning broadcast. Today, we're doing a call and response, or I guess you would just call this a response, right? That's what this is. That would be the best way to describe it. Basically, I saw this video the other day on TikTok, and I thought it was a great video. This guy named Drew was talking about something he found on Reddit, and I watched his whole response. I was like, damn, this is great. And I kind of want to respond to Drew. We don't do too many of these, but I figured, why not? Let's give it a shot. So this is Drew. And the link to this video is down in the description. Go check out his video, the full video if you want. We're going to go through it ourselves. I found myself sort of pausing and kind of responding to him. I was like, all right, let's talk. Let's talk about this here right now. So Drew is attempting to, I mean, I like his response. I like where he ended up. I think the problem with a question like this is that it's just so vast and there's so much bias that, and Drew did a fantastic job at trying to alleviate his own bias in order to answer this question. I tried to avert the same, and I came at it from a completely different angle, and I find that I have a completely different answer from Drew, and I'm going to tell you what that answer is at the end of the video after we do a response. But first, a quick note: Riot Stickers is our sponsor. Shop Riot Stickers. If you need stickers for your punk rock band, you get 1,000 stickers for $79. They come on waterproof vinyl. They're printed on waterproof vinyl. Sharpie is a wonderful guy to deal with. Super chill, super laid back dude. They got a UV coating on them to protect from the sun, of course. We all know that. And you can get 1,000 of them for $79. That's an incredible, incredible value. Do not hesitate to get Riot Stickers today. You go to link down in the description. Go to riotstickers.com/Frumess. That's FRUMESS, and that will get you to where you need to go.
We make stickers, banners, and buttons too. Posters and promo cards. There's nothing we can't print for you. From stage backdrops to bass drum heads, we can print on shirts, we can print on hats, we can print on pants. Cheap prices and high quality, quick turnaround times and free shipping. We also offer free artwork support, great customer service, and so much more. RiotStickers.com, Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com, Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com, Riot Stickers, we are the bomb. RiotStickers.com, Riot Stickers, we are the bomb.
And that right there is a promise. Okay, let's go into it. Let's dive into it, as the kids say. So this is Drew. I don't know Drew at all. I just found him on TikTok, and we're going to respond to his video. I've never tried to do this on TikTok, so I hope that it doesn't give us too much agita. Hopefully you can hear Drew as he talks. So Drew is going to introduce the topic. I'll pause along the way as I do. If you've been here before and you've seen this, we do a lot of this in the Patreon and the YouTube memberships. We're doing this with the Pusshead Danzig tape, sort of a pause and response videos. We've done 7 of those, so check those out. All right. Anyway, here's Drew.
Post on Reddit asking what the most punk anthem of all time is, and I know the way that I am means that I'm going to think about this way too much. And I feel like I've come up with the answer, but now I have to show my work. So let's talk about this. I think the first thing that we have to do is establish what's not in the running, and this is probably pretty easy to do. If there is any question at all, if it can be debated if it is a punk song, it cannot be part of this. So immediately we are going to eliminate all of like the major label pop punk. So Green Day, Blink.
So I don't disagree with what he is saying, but he initially says, and herein lies the problem with trying to define what a punk Anthem really is, because at the end of the day, he's talking about specific genres as they relate to the musical qualities in and of themselves. So there's some a genre can kind of mean a lot of different things. A genre can represent, style, but it can also represent aesthetic. I guess you could say that aesthetic and style are the same thing, maybe semantically. I don't know. Let's actually look up, what does genre mean? Define genre. Let's define genre. A category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. And herein lies the problem with punk, because the original punk back in the day was not about a genre. It wasn't a genre. It was a scene. It was a movement. And therefore, anything could be punk. And that's why in the New York movement, the original New York movement, the guys who didn't even know that they were punk, right? There wasn't even a label for it then. There was just like the band, the one, SUIDICIDICID. They had they called their stuff punk music, but I think they were calling it punk music for kind of different reasons. Of course, Legs McNeil, he claims to have coined the term punk. Punk shows up in a bunch of different early. I mean, the Ramones had a song called Judy is a Punk that goes back all the way to 1974. And I bet you that's where Legs McNeil really thought to call this music punk rock, because Legs McNeil had such an affinity for the Ramones. So all of that to say that you can't really using genre and aesthetic and style as a means to determine what makes a punk song doesn't really apply, because there's also like an ideological aspect to it, right? Like, how is this affecting people on an ideological, from a perspective of ideology? That has nothing to do with actual musical aesthetics. And so that creates a situation here. I don't disagree that ruling out all the pop punk stuff I feel like that's a no-brainer. Drew is so on point with that, because why would any of that stuff be? For me personally, I'm thinking that the punk rock anthem would have to be somewhere between the years of 1970 and 1980, right? Something like that. I think you have to be within the decade of the 70s right off the bat for it to be the all-time greatest. Why? Because I feel like part of what makes something anthemic, or part of what makes it like the de facto anthem, is that it has to represent the movement at its its core. And that's when the core of this movement kind of began, was in the decade of, or took place in the decade of the 70s. However, my answer is outside of that decade. The answer that I chose, but for good reason. I think I have a very good reason. But let's keep listening to what Drew has to say.
Blink-182, anything like that, that's gone. However, I think this also means we have to eliminate all of the proto-punk. If you don't know what proto-punk is, it's like the bands and the musicians that influenced punk but weren't part of it themselves.
So I want to correct Drew right then and there. Like, herein lies again the problem with these labels. And I use the label proto-punk all the time. Like, proto-punk it's a good label. It's a good way to categorize something. But the categorization of proto-punk happens long after punk rock has been in existence, right? This is only in hindsight can we look back and go, oh, well, that is proto-punk. That's eventually going to lead to whatever punk rock is going to be. And that doesn't really but that shouldn't, but here's the thing. Here's the thing with that. Here's the issue, is that all rock and roll essentially is proto-punk. Link Ray, Ramble. That's for Rumble. Sorry, Rumble. Link Ray, Rumble. That's friggin' proto-punk. I can't talk today. Proto-punk. So is Screamin' Jay Hawkins. I Put a Spell on You. That's proto-punk. Everything the Sonics did, the Kinks, the Beatles, Helter Skelter, all of it is proto-punk. but I don't think that you can necessarily, and at the same time though, how could any of that stuff really be, a candidate for, the greatest punk rock anthem of all time? It can't. So I do agree with Drew, but I also disagree with his categorization and justification and logic behind why proto-punk,
I don't think that any of this stuff is definitive enough to be labeled punk. That's why there's so much discussion around it.
definitive. I mean, of course, I completely disagree with that.
5 is out, Stooges out, Velvet Underground.
Why? Why would the Stooges be out? Why would the MC5 be out? I don't get that. That doesn't make any sense to me. See, this is where the bias, I think this is where the bias kind of comes in, because Drew has a very specific kind of, ideation as to what punk rock is, and that makes him sort of laser focused on a very specific answer.
Gone. New York Dolls, gone. So now I think we have.
I just don't know how you can rule out these bands. These really were the first punk rock bands. These were the first punk bands. They didn't use the label punk and they get thrown into the category of proto-punk, but they were the first punk bands. So they should count. I disagree with Drew in that. I think they should count, but let's keep going.
We have to establish like a clear timeline of when punk started to now, and that obviously begins with the Ramones. I think
that's a great answer. The Ramones, of course. Why wouldn't punk begin with the Ramones? However, I think that I really like what Jack Rabid said in some article somewhere. I've said it here on the channel before. Jack Rabid says, if you want to throw a dart at a bulletin board that hits it right on the nail when like punk really starts, like, or when you can really say like this is the dawn of punk, I really like his answer. He says it's I Got It Right by the Stooges, which is not my pick for the greatest punk anthem of all time, but I Got It Right. If you go listen, which doesn't appear on any Stooges record, like officially, it's not. It's I think it was a single. It might have come out as a single. It was at the tail end. The Stooges finished, the final iterations of the Stooges finished in 1974. I think I Got It Right is from 1973. And if you listen to those guitars, if you listen to that song, that's the first punk song. That is absolutely the first punk song. The Ramones listened to that song. The Pistols listened to that song. And that's the interesting thing too, is that you think about the Ramones in America, the Ramones in New York, you think about the Pistols in London or Britain. And why are the Pistols so important? The Pistols were such a ginormous, yes, I think I'm guilty of this too. We talk about how the Pistols were a boy band. They were put together. They were put together. They were all fans of the Faces, the Small Faces, and the Who, and they, what did they were into blah, 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 and Malcolm McLaren, arranged it, and and he tried to spin that kind of narrative in that kind of direction. But what's interesting is when you look back, when you go backwards, or when people go back and kind of look to see how music kind of influences things and kind of all fits together, something that both the Stooges and the Ramones have in common is that they both love. The Pistols and again, I can't talk this morning. The Pistols and the Ramones were both big fans of the Stooges. That's what I was trying to say. They both probably heard that song, I Got It Right. You know what I mean? So when people say, it's a British movement, punk is a British movement, or, it's a New York movement. And I personally believe that it's a New York movement, but there's a third school of thought where people will say, no. Punk actually started in Michigan, in Detroit, baby. That's where punk started, and it started with the Stooges. I think the Stooges are the first true punk band. I want to disagree with Drew. I think that the Stooges, if you want to say the MC5 or proto-punk, fine. You want to say the Velvet Underground or proto-punk, fine. I think the Stooges were absolutely a true punk band, And I think the New York Dolls were too. Although a lot of people would say that the New York Dolls are not a punk band, that they were just a rock, just a rock and roll band, however you want to classify it. They were hard rocking band. If you listen to any of those songs off of Funhouse and you tell me that that is not the dawn of punk rock, that's not true punk rock, I don't know what you're thinking. And you think that that was every band that came after it used that as their kind of building spot, their template. Obviously, I'm very biased. This is where my bias is coming in. You'll hear where Drew's comes in a little bit later. I lost my place in the video. I don't even know where we are anymore. I don't remember. I'll just press play.
No matter what argument you put up, it always comes back to the Ramones being the first punk band.
Right.
I also think.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's not a bad answer. It's definitely not a bad answer that the Ramones would be the first punk band, but there is a period of years that go back further that inform everything that the Ramones do. I don't think it's fair to look at the Ramones and look at the Stooges and anything that the Ramones were kind of doing. I mean, maybe not guitar wise, because, Johnny was not a guitarist like Ron Ashton was a guitarist. I mean, Ron Ashton, the difference between Johnny and Ron Ashton is that, Johnny was the greatest rhythm guitarist ever, but Ron Ashton was a damn fine rhythm guitarist too, who knew how to throw in leads. It's in a weird kind of way. And you would know if you watch the Stooges live somehow. And I see this in John Christ's guitar playing as well. These guys are somehow able to they're rhythm players, but they're also throwing in leads. And it almost feels like there's two guitar players as a result. I know that's not exactly possible or true or whatever, but it feels like it. And obviously, when you're recording an album, it's easy to do that. You just, you can overdub your leads in there, but I don't know. Let's keep going. You're saying it begins with the Ramones, fine, and he's going to say, this isn't a spoiler. Of course he's going to talk about Blitzkrieg Bop, and Blitzkrieg Bop should be in the running.
Qualifies them to be in the running for this. A song like Blitzkrieg Bop, it's a sing-along song. It very musically establishes like what punk is going to be, but we also have to recognize
that. Totally agree with Drew on that 100% very true.
England's influence on punk as a culture. My feelings on the Sex Pistols aside, I think that God Save the Queen does have a place in this conversation, and
100% agree with that too. That is a very good point.
Of course, London Calling by The Clash. But being that these three bands were very early in the formation of punk, they don't really have a lot in common with...
See, I would disagree. He says they're very early in the formation of punk. So the Ramones come in at, I think the Clash start in 76. The Pistols come in at 75, start at 75, and the Ramones start in 74. And you know what's interesting? The Damned aren't even in this conversation. The Damned started super early. In fact, the Damned, he doesn't even mention the Damned. The Damned are the first band, the first punk rock band to have a single out. No other punk rock band, by definition of punk rock, had a single out before the Damned, or at least the way we think of like the 77 punk rock wave that came. I mean, the Damned were there before anybody. So it's kind of interesting that he, the way that he kind of says that. But here's the other thing too. He's saying that they're too early, but I would argue, no, my friend, like we're really talking about a 15-year period here, and that everything afterwards is basically sort of a copy of a copy of a copy, or, an imitation of an imitation of an imitation of what the original movement was. And so therefore, whatever music came out of that and influenced, that would be what I regard as being the most anthemic, or the genre defining anthem for the whole situation.
What came after. When the Ramones created punk, they were just trying to emulate the rock and roll songs that they liked from their youth. Songs that were
Now, again, you can't have a conversation about punk and punk rock anthems without talking about the fact that the idea, or the heart of what punk rock is about, at least from a musical aesthetic, because again, when you think about punk rock as the scene in the 70s, musical aesthetic did not matter, but the idea that punk rock is actually a means of reform. It's a rebellion against the rebellion. The rebellion that is rock and roll, because rock and roll is all about rebellion, right? The rebellion of rock and roll had basically, the snake had eaten its tail within a decade of its formation, you know? And the Stooges and the New York Dolls and the Ramones, I would say they're on a track, because when you look at the MC5, there's nothing that the MC5 is doing that's simple. That what they're doing is, they have these two great guitar slingers. What they're doing is, and Dennis Machine Gun Thompson on the drums. What they're doing is, it's dangerous. It's complicated, or it's more complicated. It's more complicated than what the Stooges are doing. Iggy has always said, I wanted to take the blues and bring it to suburbia. He wanted to bring it to, white kids. And that's essentially no different than what Elvis did with the black music that inspired him. Elvis is like this gateway, this nexus point, this gateway for so many white people at a time when rock and roll is really segregated, to sort of connect with music that they might not otherwise be inclined to listen to because of the horrible nature of racial segregation. Elvis ends up being that bridge. So as much as you want to say fuck Elvis and Elvis appropriating and blah, 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 at the same, I don't look at it like that. Elvis was a bridge. The Beatles were a bridge. You know what I mean? That's the beautiful thing about music. Music is the exchange of ideas, and sorry, I'm getting really lost in my thought process on all this. I'm trying to pull myself back. Right. The Stooges, the New York Dolls, and the Ramones, what they were doing was a reform. It was a rebellion against the institution of rock and roll that was collapsing on itself with all of the indulgence and the virtuoso aspects of, we need to have 13-minute guitar solos and yada, yada, yada. And that's what makes the punk rock movement so beautiful. It's brilliance through simplicity, authenticity, and emotion. And that, I think, are, core concepts of what makes punk rock punk rock.
Very simple, very catchy, easy to sing along with. But they amped up the speed and aggression because that's just what they were into. And this kind of became the formula for what was going to be punk for a little while.
Now, again, he is referring to all of that stuff, hardcore, all that stuff, the pop punk. These are just echoes. These are reverberations. They are reflections, sound reflections of certain aspects of punk rock that get increasingly evolved in a certain direction. You know what I mean? All of punk pop really is just doing what the Descendants did 10 years prior. All of hardcore is really just doing pretty much what the Bad Brains were doing, and the Bad Brains themselves, they listened to a Ramones song, the Bad Brain, Too Fast. They listened to it at double speed. It was meant to be played at 33 RPM, and they listened to it at 76 or 78. And if you listen to Bad Brain at 78 speed, just double it on YouTube. Go listen to it, double it on YouTube. You're going to hear Attitude by the Bad Brains. I swear to God.
That was about it when it came to the ethics of the genre. Even though Ramones did have political songs like Bonzo Goes to Bitburg, they weren't a particularly political band. The Sex Pistols and...
I want to argue here again, that all of it is political, even when it's not being political. The Misfits are probably the least political band that you can imagine, but there are politics in their music. The social politics, the politics of being a teenager, the politics of angst, the politics of not fitting in, all of that stuff. Everything is saying something. You know what I mean? Everything has a message, So I have to disagree with Drew on that.
And the Clash did, of course, pick up that ball and run with it. But when we talk about ethics of punk, we're not just talking about the politics of it. We're also talking about the DIY aspect of it. And that was not part of these three bands' criteria. These were major label bands that had some degree of mainstream success. And it wasn't until the second wave of...
Yeah, but they started DIY. Yes, eventually they did eventually wind up on major labels, but everything that they were doing, they didn't do through... they did it on their own, or they started on their own. I guess you wouldn't say that necessarily about the Pistols, but I mean, yeah, to an extent, yes, they did. When you go and you read the book, read Steve Jones' book, and you really kind of gives you a great understanding of what that band really was.
Of punk bands that we started seeing the ethics that we now think of as punk. It's like Television and Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and I would even lump the Plasmatics into this. Then of course in like 79, 80, 81, we start to see some of the biggest evolution of punk, and that's the creation of hardcore.
I have to disagree there. It's not the evolution of punk. That's just one brand. It branched off. And again, just in the way that the Descendants, their version, whatever they were doing, kind of, triculated down. And then by the time you get to the 90s and you look at every band, every skate punk, all of them are just doing the Descendants, man. They're all just doing Descendants. And it was the same thing with the Bad Brain. These are branches. You can't look, this isn't like a straight evolution of what it became, because then you also have to look at all the 80s indie bands that are punk adjacent or have some kind of, come from some sort of punk rock or alternative background. And again, all these bands touched by the Ramones, all these bands touched by the Pistols, all these bands touched by Iggy,
Early hardcore is what a lot of people perhaps subconsciously think of as punk. The torn shirts, the piercings, the punk haircuts, and the dancing, this is all stuff that may have started in England, but it really found a voice here. And this...
I mean... Yeah, but what's funny about that is Drew, what you're not acknowledging is that all that stuff, like the safety pins, Malcolm McLaren saw Richard Hell put a safety pin in his shirt because Richard Hell just was wearing a shirt with a hole in it and just didn't give a fuck, and was like, I can make this I could commodify this, right? And then brought it back to England, and then England brought it back to America. See how that works? It's the same thing with English bands in the fucking 60s, dude. It's the same thing. American rock and roll goes to England. England, all the guys, every friggin' English band, the British invasion, bring it back to us. And that's the beauty of the sharing of ideas and culture and things, even when it gets commodified for commercial aspects. And what Malcolm McLaren was doing was purely commercial, okay? And that's the kind of the inside joke, the sort of the hilarity of it all, in that, this idea of what this movement is supposed to mean is actually really just a commercial vehicle for this guy, in that particular sense.
To me, is where we start to see the most candidates for what could be the definitive punk anthem. I think banned in DC.
I want to say I really do love Drew's logic throughout all this. I love how he really approached this from a very kind of logical, whatever you want to call it, map. Noah says Rise Above by Black Flag. Interesting. I wonder what Drew's going to say. Raphael says post 2000, at least, I think Jesus of Suburbia is the biggest modern punk rock anthem, although some people don't like to label Green Day punk. It's got everything. I mean, listen, Green Day is a great example. Green Day was of course a punk band, but they're one of these punk bands that broke. They're like Nirvana, they're like the Offspring. They found major commercial success and brought punk rock really to a lot of people that I'm sure. It's funny. I feel like we would have seen that by now. I feel like you don't hear it very often. I feel like there are you would imagine there would be a lot more people that would say, hey, I found punk rock because of Green Day. And I just feel like that's not generally stated. People don't find punk rock from Green Day. They find it from the Ramones or the Pistols, still those earlier bands. That's why I'm saying what I do agree with what Drew's saying about like how you have to cut out the pop punk stuff altogether in this conversation.
By Bad Brains has a major part in the conversation. Straight Edge by Minor Threat is 54 seconds long, but it created an entire subculture. Nazi Punk's Fuck Off by Dead Kennedys. And now at this point, what we haven't talked about is what is an anthem. By definition, it's a song that represents a people or a cause, but there's more to it than that.
Right, so I want to use that. I like that. I like what he's saying, that's what an anthem is. Let's go with that. An anthem defines a people or a cause, right? And that's where I'm using that in part as my criteria for what my pick is that I'm going to announce at the end of this video.
As a people, have always kind of thought of anthems as songs that have like parts that we can all sing along to. And I think
very key. The anthem, and that's what really makes an anthem. And that's why you absolutely, unbelievably need to have some sort of chorus. You know what I mean? You have to have a chorus. If there is no chorus, then what does it matter? So having a chorus for your anthem, like the song Rise Above, we gotta rise, you need that. If you don't have that, then it's not gonna work. Same thing with Blitzkrieg Bop. Hey, ho, let's go. So both of these songs totally could be the anthems. God Save the Queen, you could say no future. So no future could work, I guess. London Calling does not really have that. I don't know. Let's keep listening.
That every song I've mentioned so far has that part in it. But there is one song that I have not mentioned yet that I do think fits all of the criteria, and it does it a little bit better. It has a definite message to it. It is simple, it is fast, it is aggressive, and there is a very explicit sing-along portion to it. And that's
right. That's what the key to the anthem is. That's Drew said it perfectly. You need to have the sing-along portion. If you don't have the sing-along portion, then this whole conversation is not for like, so does Straight Edge really have a good sing-along portion? Does Band in DC really have a good sing-along portion? I love what Josh, what you just said, what Josh just said. This is a great song. Doesn't get talked about enough. Blank Generation by Richard Hell. I belong to the blank generation, right? I could take it or leave it behind. That 100% could be the answer. That could be, but I don't think it reaches enough people. Thomas says Rise Above is the right answer, and Noah agrees with him. Okay, I'm glad you guys. I think that somebody else is going to agree with you too.
Song is Rise Above Black Flag. It has everything, and it is not my favorite of the bunch. However, if I wanted to show somebody what's punk, I would probably show them that song towards the beginning. And that is my answer, and I'm sticking to it. Yesterday,
that's a good answer. It's not a bad answer. I'm not saying it's not a bad answer. Noah says, fits all these categories. I'm feeling it. Thomas says, depends on your personal definition of punk. Richard Hell is more of a fuck it. What's the point? I mean, listen, Blank Generation is definitely, and there's a movie called Blank Generation. Blank Generation has been used a whole bunch to describe that early punk rock movement. For me, I want to give my answer. He said, Thomas says, Rise Above is my version of punk. Never give in to these fuckers. My answer personally is, without a doubt, hands down, the greatest punk rock anthem of all time is the first punk rock song, I Want to Be Your Dog by the Stooges. Why? Okay, hear me out. Because I want to be your dog. The lyrics are so simple. First, I'm so messed up. I want you here in my room. I want you here. Now we come face to face, and I lay right down by my favorite place. Now I want to be your dog. Now I want to be your dog. Now I want to be your dog. I Want to Be Your Dog is the first I Wanna song. Predating, the Ramones were not the first ones to do I Wanna. I want to be a good boy. I want to be your boyfriend. I don't want to go down to the basement. I don't want to walk around with you. The band that did it first was the Stooges. I want to be your dog. And the idea, the concept of I want to be your dog, that's the beginning of that. That's the rebellion. I want to be your dog. Every punk band that we were discussing, all these punk bands, they either heard I Want to Be Your Dog, they covered I Want to Be Your Dog. It's everybody's covered I Want to Be Your Dog. You know, I would say there's more covers of I Want to Be Your Dog than there are Rise Above. What does that mean for anthemic? I don't know, but I think that the chorus of I Want to Be Your Dog, again, I said this was my personal pick. I think I Want to Be Your Dog is the ultimate punk rock statement, more so than even Rise Above. You know, Rise Above fits a very specific politicized sort of avenue of what punk rock was, whereas I Want to Be Your Dog kind of spreads across the net and kind of encapsulates the attitude and the feelings of angst, of not feeling like you fit in. You know, all of that stuff fits with I Want to Be Your Dog. I want to, like, this idea of wanting to degrade oneself or to not care about wanting to be the best or wanting to be the most loved. I just want to be your dog. There's just something about I Want to Be Your Dog. To me, that's the greatest punk rock anthem by far. And again, I'm very biased because I'm a huge Stooges fan. It's funny, we haven't even brought up the Misfits once in this conversation, but that's because I don't think the Misfits are in the conversation as much as I would want Last Caress or, you know, just anything else, Die, Die, My Darling. I mean, none of those songs are in this conversation. They're not. But I Want to Be Your Dog, when you think about the reach that I Want to Be Your Dog from 1970 all the way through for decades, all of the bands and people that message has touched, that to me, that's the ultimate. So yes, you know, from a commercialized sort of like wide, from a homogenized net, meaning like we're looking at people who aren't even into punk rock and you ask them what's the greatest punk rock anthem, they're going to say Blitzkrieg Bob, right? That's what everybody's going to pick. For someone who's more inside baseball, they're probably going to be like Thomas and Noah here. They're going to say it's Rise Above. It's absolutely Rise Above. It's a good choice. Not disagreeing. Straight Edge would have been a good choice, but Straight Edge is very specific to a particular movement within this counterculture movement. Band in DC, I love that he thought of Band in DC. God Save the Queen is very specific to Britain, right? Even though obviously that was international too. I Want to Be Your Dog transcends every single one of these categories, except maybe Blitzkrieg Bob. I guess maybe the real answer is Blitzkrieg Bob. You know, I hate to say this, but I'm kind of amending what I'm saying. So my personal answer is I Want to Be Your Dog, but I think the actual answer is not Rise Above. I think the actual answer is Blitzkrieg Bob. That's the answer. I leave you with the question, what do you think the greatest punk rock anthem is? That's it. That's the show. What do you know? I just realized, how do I stop the... That's strange. All right, let's just see what happens when I drop this out. But in any case, peace, hair grease. We'll see you. We'll see you next time. Here, I don't know what's going to happen when I drop out of the stream because it's telling. No, it's already live. Yeah. So how do I get the fuck out of here? No, Noah agrees. Noah agrees. I can agree with that about Blitzkrieg Bob. Thanks for the stream. Thank you, Noah. Thank you. All right. How do I get out of here? Whoa. Ha! I'm back in the stream. How did that happen? That's insane. All right. Well, now we're really ending the stream. Peace. Air Grace. We'll see.